How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk Live. Tier Talk Live. Hey guys, we're going to be discussing active shooters. I know recently we had an incident in Texas, and there's a lot of questions that I'm hoping that my expert will be able to answer. One is delayed entrances. We're also going to be talking about teachers carrying weapons in the school. We're going to talk about preparation. Are we too aggressive, or can we do this passively? We have a lot to cover today. We are going to also have Gary York on. Gary York has been on before. I know you guys are very familiar with Gary York. Gary York was actually trained in active shooter as well, but he worked for the court system. So he was trained as a bailiff. So we're going to talk maybe some differences between active shooters that would take place in a school versus an active shooter that would take place in the courts. But also my boy, Joseph Pangaro, he trains in general too with active shooters. So we're not just talking about schools here. We're talking about any area where there could be a bunch of people centralized, which gives the active shooter kind of open field. And that's what makes it scary. A lot of these active shooters are just looking to just take people out. So they're going wherever they can, where there are the most amount of lives and what makes a target vulnerable as well. So they're going to vulnerable targets that have the most amount of lives. Guys, our show is sponsored by three entities. We have American Military University. If you guys are looking to go back to school, get a degree, seek higher education, please check out American Military University. It's a great school, great online school, very supportive of what we do in corrections, also very supportive of what we do here on Tier Talk. We also have Guardian RFID, from inmate tracking and cell checks to cloud-based business and artificial intelligence. Guardian RFID digitally transforms jails, prisons, and juvenile detention facilities of every size. Visit guardianrfid.com for more information. And we also have Shea USA. Now, guys, it's spelled C-E-I-A. Shea USA, C-E-I-A. And it's Shea USA is the world's leading weapon, cell phone, and contraband detection system manufacturer for corrections. For more information, contact Joe Vasquez, 440-561-7615. He is a subject matter expert. He's passionate about our industry, and he will take good care of you. We already have over 20 people in the room. That's pretty good. Hello, Alicia B. Hope all is well. Steve, Sharon, Eric S., Tara. Hello, Tara. And the list is growing. Let me bring on our guest, guys. So first, let me bring on a very familiar face, Gary. We have Gary York. Gary, what's up, brother? How you been?
Hello, Anthony. Thank you for asking me to be on the show with Joe. Joe is the expert. Joe is the trainer, the expert trainer in going in for active shooters. But I, on the other hand, was not a trainer, but I was trained for 10 years straight in active shooting by the Polk County Sheriff's Office, Sheriff Grady Judd and his crew. And they were very serious about us being trained in active shooting and being aggressive. And I'll leave it at that for now. That's the end I come from on the active shooter list. And I appreciate you having me. I've got 38 years government experience, 10 years United States Army Military Police, and 28.8 years in the Florida corrections system. And again, thank you for letting me be with you today.
No, I'm honored. And I just want to, before we bring on Joe, let me show you a video of his. Bear with me, guys. I'm going to put it on.
Hi, I'm Lieutenant Joe Pangaro for True Security Design. We are providers of dynamic training for school, staff, and students. I spent 27 years in law enforcement, and when I retired, I took my skill set over to the schools where I became a director of school safety and security. I've developed training to keep you, your staff, and your students safe. We offer training on active shooter response, de-escalation training, understanding what goes on with threat assessments, as well as how to assess a potentially dangerous student. We're also offering anti-vaping training. We know that vaping is a huge problem in school. We're offering webinar-based training for you, for parents, and for students, so that everyone understands the dangers, the health risks, and the consequences of vaping in school. So True Security Design, we're here to help you with all your school safety and security needs.
Anti-vaping now. Okay, let me get Joe in. Joe, you're let me unmute you, Joe. Hey, Joe, welcome. Thanks for joining us on Tier Talk. Joe, you mind introducing yourself to our audience, please?
Sure, absolutely, Anthony. First of all, thank you for having me on and let me speak to your audience, and it's nice to be here with you guys. I spent 27 years, as the video said, in law enforcement. I spent most of that time in the investigative division. As I got promoted up, some of the tasks that you get involved with are homeland security activities, anti-terrorism, and that kind of thing. But last couple of years, when I was promoted to lieutenant, they put me in charge of keeping these schools and our businesses safe. We had a big mall, we had a bunch of other areas, and we were all concerned about active shooters. So that's the kind of training that I received from Homeland Security, and then I started to employ it in our community. When I retired, I went to the schools as a school security director to learn what the schools really need, not what law enforcement often thinks they need, but what they really need. And now I teach and train across the country, in person, remotely. I teach law enforcement, schools, businesses, summer camps, religious facilities. My mission in life now is to try and keep people safe and have them have a secure environment for everybody.
Joe, just out of curiosity, and listen, my mic is muted, so I know there's somebody here that's going to catch it. So, because I forget sometimes, I'm horrible at that. But hey, Joe, I know you've had years in law enforcement, and then obviously now you're crossing into this years after you've been out of law enforcement. Because how long have you been retired now?
I retired in 2013. I went to the schools until 2018. And then I've been teaching and training in police academies. I still do. I have contracts with different states for training, and keeps me active in the situation.
So you were an SRO then, correct?
No, I wasn't. I was in the detective bureau, and I was running the bureau. But part of our duties as you went through the ranks there were different safety and security types of things. So we had Homeland Security. You would be in charge of active shooter preparation and training. I was in charge of the training division. I took that over, which led me into my company when I retired to teach and train people.
So I got to kind of like starting off with a very generalized question, but because of what we happened, the recent school shootings, and obviously, we have them that happened. Columbine is the incident I first remember, to be honest with you, to now, which was recently about a week and a half ago, we had the incident in Texas. You figure at this point we would be evolving and getting better. But from certain experts, they feel that we're actually falling backwards. Do you feel that our responses over the course of time is improving, or do you feel that there are certain things that we're falling back on?
That's a great question. I think when you think about Columbine, the way we used to do things back then, the law enforcement response to that kind of an incident, and it wasn't an everyday incident like it is now almost, we would surround and drown the place. The cops would show up, create the perimeter, call a SWAT team. 45 minutes later, the SWAT team would show up, and they would go room by room. We realized at the time that as these started to take place more often, we have to go faster. By the time the SWAT team would get there, everyone who was going to be killed, including often the shooter who commits suicide, would be dead, and it would be a mop-up operation. So we realized we got to train the local officers to go quickly, because they can usually be in the school within a couple of minutes. And we started to feel better. We took it seriously. Anthony, I think one of the biggest things that we did back then to make it more serious was that I had all these young men and women I was supposed to train, and people, contrary to popular belief, that often say, they think law enforcement is trained to kill people as our first. It's not. That's not what we're trained to do. We're trained to use everything else until we use deadly force. And what I found was this was such a brand new concept that the first 4 officers that get together would go to the sound of the gunshots, and you had a couple of options. If the shooter saw you and dropped the weapon, you arrested them. If the shooter ran into a closet, locked themselves in, you contained them. If they continued to shoot or endanger other people, you immediately apply deadly force. That was a brand new concept to law enforcement, to go right to that as an option. And I had these young men and women, these heroes that are out there trying to do the right thing. And I had to teach them, this is what you have to do. This is how you're going to save people. And this may be the incident where your family, your loved one, your significant other gets that folded up flag, because these things can be very, very dangerous. You have to go to the sound of those gunshots and do what you can to stop the shooter.
Now, Alicia mentioned, is it true that these incidents usually average about 10 to 15 minutes?
Alicia, not anymore. They used to be 10 to 15. Let's see, when we got to Sandy Hook, that was over in about 4 minutes. So we're looking at between 4 and 7 minutes, and it's almost, that's about the timeline, 4 to 7 minutes, and it's all over.
So now, what obviously, if the are we assuming that the time is quicker now because the active shooters becoming more advanced?
No, I think that's what it always was. We had to catch up to the timeline. So one of the things that, I like to use catchphrases because it helps us to remember when we're doing training and thinking. And we have to realize when it comes to an active shooter, time equals life. So law enforcement had to catch up to the fact that these shooters go in, they have a purpose. They're going in to take out as many victims as they can as quickly as possible. And they know when they announce themselves, either at the front door trying to break the glass or going in, as soon as they announce themselves, firing a round, they know who's coming eventually, law enforcement, and they know what's going to happen. So their goal is to find as many vulnerable, easy targets as possible. And we had to catch up with the fact that this was not a 2-hour long, drawn out kind of thing. This is go in and shoot as many as you can. And what we see often is usually two outcomes. Either law enforcement or armed security applies deadly force and takes them out, or they take themselves out. The one-off is like the Parkland kid who dropped his gun and ran outside, or the shooter at the newspaper down in Maryland who shot a bunch of people and hid under a desk. That's the one-off. These people either die by law enforcement or they take themselves out, and it's usually very, very quick.
Yeah, I want to get into protective gear for law enforcement, Sharon. I think it's Sharon. So I didn't forget about you. I want to jump on some more of the dialogue before we get to that point, because there's a lot of things we need to cover. But one of the things is I want to go to a video first. I'm going to go to Gary to get some insight, and then I want to go back to Joe. I have a few videos that I line up that are a little bit more controversial in nature, but that's why I'm going to put it out there to see what our thoughts are. And I thought after the video play, I'll get Gary's thoughts on it, and then I'll get Joe's thoughts as well. So there's the first video I want to show you relates to the active shooting drills. Now, a lot of people are saying that the active shooting drills, which I believe are necessary, but there's a concern with how real they are and how that could affect the children. So, I mean, is there a balance between, how aggressive they got to be to make it realistic? Or, do we have to kind of walk the individuals through it? So first, let me play this video first, Joe, and then we're going to go ahead and explain that, because I think that, sorry, my phone's going off. I think that matters. So let me play this video real quick. Hold on. Let's see. I thought this was a good video that can kind of open up this part of the dialogue. Basically, it's called Active Shooter Drills. Do they present more harm than good? So hold on.
Like to think that students, teachers, and staff are prepared in case the unthinkable should happen in their school. The overwhelming majority of states now require school shooting drills. Correspondent Kelly Beeson joins me now. Kelly, there is a real push to make certain that all this practice is helpful and not sometimes hurtful.
Yeah, you're certainly right, Brian. The American Academy of Pediatrics, the National Education Association, Sandy Hook Promise, these are all organizations that are saying protection of classrooms is critical, yet so too is the protection of our students' mental health.
Lockdown. Teachers, please follow your lockdown procedures at this time.
We've seen the drills, the stage simulations,
2 shooters working on their scripture right now.
the actual fear. Indeed, the worry is all of this practicing in our nation's schools is having a serious impact on mental health. In fact, a Georgia Tech study found that after a school shooter drill, students reported a 39% increase in depression and a 42% increase in stress.
Whether or not you actually have a shooting, an actual shooting versus a simulated, you're creating the same physiological response, serotonin, dopamine, crisis, flight or fight. So to me, you're actually creating a traumatic experience.
In recommending that school districts re-examine how they're doing these drills, the American Academy of Pediatrics detailed one recent live exercise in which high school students were deceived to believe it was a real event. Children sobbed hysterically, vomited, or fainted. Some children sent farewell notes to parents.
There should be a permission slip. Do I want my child in this drill or not? So there should be an awareness. And then the child should be prepped ahead of time. And if you don't want your child to have it at school, it should be done at home.
Those recommendations line up with the American Academy of Pediatrics, which suggests no deception, meaning pretending that the drill is real, no fake blood or corpses, no using gunshot sounds, and no predatory actors or rattling doors.
It was kind of frightening because we were just sitting there in silence and all of a sudden someone shakes the door handle.
But in this era, where the scenes of actual school shootings dominate the headlines, there's strong consensus that lockdown practice, done safely and properly, should certainly be on the curriculum.
At this time, our lockdown drill is complete.
It looked like a ghost town. It looked like a school on a Saturday when there's just no students in sight. And that's what we want.
And Dr. McDermott recommends letting your child set the tone after a lockdown drill. Ask questions, but stay neutral, since some students don't find them upsetting at all. And she also personally treats her child to a quick fun outing the day of the drill to imprint a positive memory that's then associated with that safety practice, Brian.
Seems like good advice. Thank you, Kelly. Okay, Max Schachter is going to join us now. He lost his son, Alex, in the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. And he is the founder and executive director of Safe Schools for Alex. Max, thank you for being with me. I met you shortly after Parkland. It's always amazed me how you have turned your grief into this mission to make schools throughout the entire country safe. And yet we see in Texas that this gunman walked right into the school through an open door. And then we learn about this police response that was subpar at best. They didn't follow the training that even they had recently received. I mean, you've worked so hard, Max. That's got to be so frustrating to see.
It's heartbreaking, Brian. You know, from being in this community many, many times, that the reason we started Safe Schools for Alex is to prevent this from ever happening again. And I travel the country and I present all over to many, many law enforcement agencies, specifically on the failed law enforcement response. Whereas you know that we had 9 of the Broward Sheriff's Office deputies stay outside while the shooting was happening. The SRO never went in. And the shooter, the murderer, would have never gotten on campus if they did not unlock the gates and the gates were staffed properly. And the Parkland murderer exited an Uber, walked right onto campus. He walked through an unlocked door to the 1200 building, and no one ever called a code red. So what's so frustrating, everything I've been doing for the last 4 years is preaching about if we just implement the lessons that we learned after Parkland, we know that we can save lives. And it looks like all the mistakes from Parkland were repeated and then some in Uvalde. And it's just heartbreaking. And I feel so horrible for all these families that are now having to bury their loved ones.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. It's frustrating. The U.S. Department of Justice, as you know, Max, has now said they're going to do a thorough review of what happened to find out what went wrong. But it doesn't seem that complicated. I mean, we can already tell what went wrong, right? Basically, the same mistakes as Columbine and the same mistakes as Parkland.
Yeah, you know, after Parkland, I had this idea where we needed to create national school safety standards and national school safety best practices. And the best practices are teacher needs to be teaching with a locked door. You know, as soon as you can call a code red and lock the children down, that they want to make sure that they're in a safe space. And, you know, what we have learned so far is that the shooter was outside firing at the school. Well, when that happens, you've got to lock that school down. It does not look like that happened. And the children were not secure. The gunman walked right into an unlocked classroom door. And that is really the nightmare situation. And then to have law enforcement arrive and to be hearing calls and calls from 911 from inside the classroom, multiple calls from the kids in that classroom saying there are kids alive in here, please come in. And for law enforcement to stay outside is just unacceptable and inexcusable. And I think it's important that the Justice Department is doing an investigation, but we've got, there's so many mass shootings. We should not be complacent in this society about what to do when an active shooter happens. When that murderer was firing on that campus, that is an active shooter situation, and they should have gone right in. So it's just heartbreaking again to see the failures. And that's why, there needs to be a layered approach. Unfortunately, people are going to make mistakes. That's why you've got to have layers of protections, concentric rings of security. But the most important thing is you've got to stop the killing, and then you've got to stop the dying. And neither of that happened. And it's just heartbreaking, because we know that when these incidents happen, if you do not stop an arterial bleed within 5 minutes, your chances of living are extremely minute. So we've got to do a better job. And I'm hoping that this report by the Justice Department highlights some best practices and lessons learned so that this never happens again. It should never happen again.
Max, when I was in Uvalde last week, I found myself thinking about you several times, because I was looking at these families and just thinking to myself, gosh, they are just now starting this process that you went through, unfortunately. And I know you've spoken to families in the past that find themselves in this situation. I mean, what do you say to these families?
Brian, that was the worst day in my life, the night before, trying to write Alex's eulogy, when I was just at a loss. It was 5 a.m, and I was going through with my son, trying to figure out what to say. And we looked in the trash can, and out we pulled this poem that Alex had written called "Life is Like a Roller Coaster." And I had no idea that Alex was a poet, and he had no idea that his life was going to end like this. But it's heartbreaking, and I've traveled to many of these horrible tragedies. And what I say to these families is that, I know where you're at. I've been there, and I know that they're hoping that this is just a nightmare that they can wake up from. But every time I'm with families that have gone through this, it helps me, and it helps them to know that they'll never move on, but they will move forward every day, because they might have other children, they have loved ones, they have a spouse, a husband or a wife, and so they will, and they'll do the same thing that the 17 Parkland families have done. They will do everything in their power to keep their loved one's memory alive. They might start a charity or do whatever, but that's our goal in life. That's why I started Safe Schools for Alex, is to get the message out that if we implement the lessons learned after Parkland and after Uvalde, they should know that the horribleness that it was, there will come about. Kids' lives will be saved because of their tragedy. I can promise them that.
Gosh, I hope so. Max, thank you for joining us, and thanks for all the hard work that you continue to do.
Thank you, Brian, for having me.
Thanks for watching.
All right. So real quick, I may have someone else coming in as well. Alicia's working on it. But before we go to Gary real quick, I want to mention something real quick. There's something I didn't like that the reporter said. He kind of said like things are easy, they're obvious, and they're not. I disagree with that. I think that as these situations evolve, a lot of people try to put their own 2 cents in, especially politics, and they make things more complex to where people become hesitant. So a lot of people may think it's easy, but it's not. If you're on the other end of this, people trying to come up with these instant solutions that at the end of the day, you're only making matters more complex because you're taking it away from the people that are responding. That's the problem. Instead of us going to the people that are the ones in the field, asking them, hey, what do you feel would be the best way to do it? The politicians pick up on it, and they're the furthest from the incident. And then they're trying to tell people how to do it. And that to me is what makes it more complex, is that they're being told what to do from people who would never, ever have to make that choice. Hey, Gary, what's your thoughts on, these drills? I mean, do you honestly think that the drills have to be aggressive to show some level of reality, or can we be passive, or does the aggression actually, does it affect the kids?
Well, I can actually tell you from experience, I've participated in these drills. I just want to say that in 2018, as you all know, the Stoneman Douglas High School here in Florida, known as Parkland, we lost 19 children, 2 teachers. Shortly after that, Congress passed the Stop Violence in Schools. Since that occurred, and it's unfortunate that something like that occurred, and now we're really on the roll. But here in Florida, we've been really going strong on stopping school violence. We have 44 out of our 67 counties involved in the Guardians program now. We don't just have the school resource officers that are deputies or sworn police officers, but we have guardians that are being trained and trained very well for many hours to add additional. We've added 90 additional alone in our county. Now back to the video. I went to Gilchrist High School, Gilchrist County, Florida, with First Sergeant John Meinholz, United States Army retired. And we did a lockdown drill at that high school in 2019 after this Parkland incident. So I actually had the experience to go through a drill with the students, and I didn't want to just stand back as an observer. So I told the first sergeant, hey, I want to go to lockdown with the students. Let me just be a student. And I actually went and locked down with these students. And it was like a ghost town, as they said in the video. And I was in this little dark room with the lights out, with concrete walls, and we were all in the room. Everybody knew where they had to go, and whatever classroom they were in, they know where they had to report to in case of an active shooter incident or an alert. Now, my experience was that none of these students were traumatized at all by this drill. They knew right where to go. They did it well. They took it well. And when it was over, I didn't hear anyone say, you know, I need help or anything. Not to say that that's not happening. Listen, I'm not a doctor or psychologist. I'm sure that's happening with some students. Just at this particular school that I did the lockdown drill with in 2019, this did not occur. We did not have anybody. Safe room. Who is that? Nigel, thank you. The term is safe room that we all went to. Thank you for putting that in there. And I did not see that, but I'm sure some students could get traumatized by it. I also think it's how it's presented. We did not have anyone beating down a door, coming in with a pop gun, making gun sounds. Should that be done? I don't know. You know, we teach pretty aggressive here in Polk County. And we try to be aggressive because we try to make reality as best we can. Because look, folks, we have to do everything we can to train. We cannot ignore it. Now, we should have people on standby to talk to the children if they feel depressed or anxiety after a drill lockdown. We did have that at the Gilchrist High School here in Florida when we did this lockdown. There were people on standby just in case a student needed to be talked to or let the anxiety out or discuss things about the drill. Fortunately, we didn't have that occur. We do have this Guardians program now, and we have added 90 additional guardians, not school resource officers. These are labeled as guardians. And we've got almost every county in the state on board with this. And I think we need to get more states to do this. Unfortunately, in today's world, and if anybody thinks I'm wrong, just tell me. Unfortunately, in today's world, we need the presence to hopefully deter some of this violence. And we need the lockdown. The schools have to be locked down. You know, we don't want to make a Gestapo out of it, but we're going to have more school security on hand. And I believe, maybe Joe knows the answer to this when we go to him now, the Stop School Violence that was passed by Congress, our state is using money from that to train our guardians, our additional people. And I think it can be used everywhere, right, Joe?
I think you can, if you can get government money. A lot of places divert the money, though. They divert it from what it's intended for, which is unfortunate. But with all the money we spend around the world to do the right thing, help other people, we should spend some money here to make sure every school is prepared. So when I listen to Max talk about that and losing his son, absolutely horrifying. You can imagine that training is essential. So Anthony, I'm going to jump into this question that you posed there. What is the right way to train? How much is too much? What is not enough? The reality about training, I do threat assessments to schools all across the country. I go in and I take a look. I look at their drills, their policy, procedure, their equipment, how they respond. And I see many, many different responses. Somebody put in the chat earlier that their school district still leaves the doors open. Well, I did a program for Homeland Security in Bucks County. We had 80 school districts there. And I just asked the question. I threw an overhead question. I said, how many districts here still leave their doors open? I expected no one. About 10 or 11 people raised their hand. And I said, why are your doors still open in this day and age? And they said, well, the families don't want it to feel like it's a prison. So they want to be able to come in whenever they want. And we can work that out, but lock your doors. We saw in this incident in Florida, apparently it was an open door, and we saw the tragedy there. How much training is the right training? Well, I think there's a couple ways to look at it. I'm making notes here as people are talking and we're watching the videos. When you're going to do a drill, it has to be age appropriate, right? If we were to go in and do with live role players, which I've done in many locations in my district when I was in law enforcement, and since then with some districts that really want to go to the next level, we use role players to set things off, but it's age appropriate. What I would do at a high school or a middle school, I certainly wouldn't do it in an elementary school because those kids might not be ready. But the way I talk about it is, instead of making it as scary as it really is, because we're talking life and death, you empower people. You know, teachers are sometimes concerned about the drill and how it makes them feel. Some students can be that way, but I say you have to empower people to survive. That's what we're teaching. So when we balance this out, are there going to be some kids that are going to be upset?
Joe, you got to mention that again, man. That was truly powerful. I'm going to have a lady, Anna, on shortly, but I really want you to break that down again. You said that you empower people to survive. How is that different than the perspective of it being over-aggressive?
Sure. Thank you, Anthony. And there is a difference. There's a major difference. You can teach someone to do something. Here's the rote way I want you to move. But if people understand, listen, the reason that we're doing this is going to help you to survive if there is an incident, and you'll be better off. You'll be able to help yourself. So I always use that empowerment with the teachers and with the students, because they have voiced to me that they're concerned. Some of them have never seen a gun in their life, and now they're going to do these lockdowns, and it's very scary. And I say, listen, we don't want the first time you have to respond to something to be the first time you thought about it. Right? So we talk about something, then we walk through it, and then we run the drill. But the drill needs to have some realism. Now, the level is dependent, again, age dependent. But I've done lockdown drills where I go through the school and we record what's going on. We video record to see who's doing what. And I have seen teachers like turn the lights back on and go, all right, that's enough of this. We're going to keep teaching. I've had administrators that go, listen, basically we have to do it, so we just check it off. And that's not really helping. We have to practice to empower people to save their own lives. When they hear this happening, when they think something's going on, they know what to do. And we can't avoid that with these kids. Why did we do fire drills for years? So when the building's on fire, we know what to do. Tornado drills, exactly the same thing. You have to know what to do. And over the years that I've done this, when we've done the more aggressive type of programs, we have had opt-outs, because if somebody thought their son or daughter really couldn't handle it, we would let them opt out. But it has been very, very far and few between. Somebody mentioned that they did a drill. They did a drill where they didn't tell anybody it was going to be a drill, and a serious one. They had officers and everything. Kids were upset. I would never do that. What we do is we say, here's the day of the drill. It's going to take place here on this date. We just don't tell them when. So people have enough forewarning to know that it's a drill, but they don't know when it's coming. That adds enough realism that they can react. Breaking this down, it's It's how you look at the people that are involved so that they can get up and move and save themselves when the time comes.
Yeah, Joe, I want to bring in Anna. So let me get her in. Hey, Anna, you're maybe muted. There we go.
Very familiar with that.
Yeah, and I'm not, obviously. So anytime I get a chance to give someone advice on it, which I'm really not the person should be giving the advice, I try to. Hey, Ann, first off, Alicia B gave me your information, said you're in the chat. Yeah. Are you allowed to speak real quick at all, or I don't want to get anybody in trouble?
I am.
Okay, so however you want to introduce yourself, do you mind introducing yourself? Because I do have a question about the training.
Yep. I'm Anna, and I'm a special educator for Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland. And we do various drills for active shooter, as well as various weather events and safety drills if there's an unsafe situation within the school.
Yeah, so I think the question we want to ask right now as a teacher, and obviously you've been involved in a lot of these drills, I'm assuming, is there a balance between being just like walking people through as opposed to really showing someone the reality of it all? And what would you prefer?
I think there does have to be a bit of a balance. I teach elementary, so I work with the younger ones who are a little more susceptible to long-term fears from a drill that is very realistic. But particularly as we get older, some sense of reality, like maybe shaking the doorknob a little to help the kids understand that if there is a dangerous situation, whether it's an active shooter or something else going on, that is not the time to get up and answer the door. Sorry, my dog is making an appearance. But it is also important to at least actively practice, okay, there's a situation, here's our code phrase that we use to say that it's not actually over, or that it is actually over, that dangerous situation, and get into the safe positions to where we would need to be in order to be safe from an active shooter or other threat within the building.
Now, I want to add something. So Aries is mentioning about teachers being armed. But before we get to all that, because I have two videos I still want to show, and one of the videos is going to be about teachers being armed. It's a little dated, but the premise is there. That's the key. But Joe, someone mentioned before, when it comes to preparation, the metal detectors. A lot of people have issues with metal detectors because they said it makes the school look like a war zone. I mean, what's your thoughts on having metal detectors in schools?
Well, first of all, if you can catch the weapons going in, because you have two different kind of threats. You have the internal threat, which is people we let into our buildings. These are our staff, our students, our visitors. And we see most of our shooters are internal threat people. We don't check all backpacks. We don't have the metal detectors. So I've seen some districts where they have lots of violence. They have the metal detectors and people are just used to it. You need a lot of them. You need a lot of people trained to do it. I know there are other kinds out there. I saw this one product it's called a View Scan. And basically it's a non-ferrous metal weapons detection thing. And they can build it into the wall of the doorway. So it doesn't look like you have a metal detector there. And what it does is, instead of just saying there's metal on the person, you see a picture, which can be in another room, a monitor watching it, and a spot will pop up right on the spot where the metal is. And now you can go over and talk to that person and say, hey, let me see what's on your ankle. Let me see what's here, instead of doing the pat downs and all that. If you can get them in there, the problem is throughput. You know, you got 3,000 kids at a high school that come in and have to be there. How do you get them all through in a timely fashion? You start school an hour early to get them through. So that's kind of the problem. One of the things we should talk about, Anthony, at some point here is the reality that there's a lot of things we can do to prevent. But one of the things we absolutely can do to prevent is train staffs in the school to understand and recognize what a threat is and how to spot a potentially dangerous student or a person at a workplace. Most of these people don't wake up on a Tuesday morning and decide, I'm going to go kill 10 kids. They've thought about it. It's come up in their mind. They've made social media posts. They've written. They start to change the clothes that they wear. It's called leakage. These things start to come out, and we can spot in many instances who may attack us. And we do that by training teams in our schools that when we see something, hear something, How do we go and investigate that as opposed to waiting for the bullets to fly and then just locking down? So there's a whole bigger world to this that we can do.
Hey, Joe, you mentioned something I thought was unique, and I do want to get to one of Miss Chips Ahoy question. I thought it was unique in what she said in regards to the training, but I want to go back and ask you something. You said internal threat. Are most of the, I mean, let's say for the school, because we're focused on schools right now, are most of the active shooter cases coming from internal, coming from inside the school, people that are permitted on the ground, or is it coming from people that aren't permitted?
Yeah, most of the active shooter events that we see are internal threats. They are students in the school. The external threats are like we saw this particular case in Uvalde and in Parkland. They were outside people who came in. Sandy Hook, same thing. There's an outside person who attacked the school, but the overwhelming majority of them are internal threat people that we let in the buildings, and they have a problem. They're having a difficulty in their life, whether it's diagnosed or undiagnosed mental disease. They're having problems in their life, and it's a buildup, and then something triggers that event, and then the violence erupts.
Now, I want to, Ms. Chips Ahoy asked the question, and you know what I would like to do is maybe get all three people to answer this. I'll start with Gary, then I'll go with Anna, then I'll go with Lieutenant Joe. I thought this question was unique. So we were talking about the training itself, and we were talking about whether it's aggressive or a little bit more walkthrough. She said, "What about if we had small daily sessions with complete sessions at the end of each week? Sometimes less at a time is more, and it may stick with all personalities that endure the training session." Now, for me, I would think something would have to be fluid, but would this be something that you would consider a middle road? What's your thoughts on that, Gary? I'll go to you first.
Well, it's funny you say that. In law enforcement and corrections academies, we do a little each day, right? And then we go out and we maybe do some real life scenarios, and then we do our written test. It's not a bad idea, but it would have to be looked at thoroughly by the school administrators. Again, we may have parents that need to know that this is going on and what you're going to teach their children. But it may not be that bad of an idea, because can they retain everything all in one day, or do we only train once a month and they have to try to retain everything all in one day? Or do we do it by piecemeal, like we train officers in the academy, or we train officers when they get out of the academy and we're putting them through their road training or their corrections floor training? Maybe not a bad idea.
Yeah, I think what's unique about this all is that also a lot of people, it may not even just be nervous about the training itself. It's more of, what am I supposed to do? What's my role? The pressure of the training itself. So, I mean, being introduced to this and then kind of having people understand what their role is, and then a final test at the end to see where everybody fits in could show a level of comfortability. But what's your thoughts on that, Ann? I'm curious to see what your thoughts are.
So as a teacher, and I saw someone else comment this too, repetition is one of the best things we can do to ensure understanding and be able to apply that. And so I think I agree with Gary in some of the some smaller lessons to kind of talk about things like, one of the biggest things would be situational awareness. Something we females are often taught is to be aware of your surroundings. Look for who is there, what are they doing, where is somewhere safe that you can go to should someone try to, for example, put their hands on you. So in schools, it'd be helpful to look for, where are those safe places? Where are those safe people you could go to, whether it's an active shooter, another student acting in an appropriate way towards you, an adult, or whatever else might happen. Just be able to practice it a little bit each time, so that it kind of sinks in and it becomes normal. When I was first taught to start looking around and looking at who's there and whatnot, it was hard at first, but as I got more used to it, it became second nature, to the point where I would say, "Hey, did you notice that guy? He was acting kind of weird." And some people, even other women around me, were like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, the guy with he had the red shirt and the white hat, and he just kind of hunched over, and they still have no idea what I'm talking about. So bringing in some of those basic skills, I think, would be good to use into practice.
Yeah, and what's your thoughts on that, Joe? Are you in agreement?
Well, I got to tell you, we do briefing training, don't we? At the beginning of a briefing, we tell everybody, watch out for this car, look out for that person, and hey, by the way, let's spend 2 minutes talking about oiling our handcuffs so they work, right? One of the things I know from being in the schools is that time is precious for them. Breaking down time and taking time every single day might be too much, but I think we know how to lock down in the classroom. So maybe if we took some time every day to say, hey, listen, if the door was locked, where would we all go? Let's take a look. How would we do that? Could we move cabinets in front of the door real quick? Maybe try that one day. That take you 3 minutes with a teacher and students to push stuff in front of the door and get behind the lines. That there should be lines on the floor where you can't see from outside the window that we get behind. That's take 3-4 minutes. Maybe you do that once a week just to do it real quick. When you're in the gym, maybe you talk about, where would we hide in the gym? Do the gym doors lock completely? Could you go into an area? Could you flee onto the field? What if you're on a football field and somebody shows up? Do you have rally points to go to? So I'm not opposed to it. I think it's a good idea. And here's what it does. When we do this over and over, and it connects empowering to people, when it's rare and it seems scary, it's harder to do. But when you do it on a more regular basis, you inoculate people to fear. That's what I call it. I'm no longer afraid of this happening. I'm prepared to respond and save myself. And that's the empowering part of it. So I don't think it's a bad idea. It's just the amount of time that we would be able to dedicate to it.
Hey, let me ask another question for you, Joe, real quick, because you mentioned that most of the threats are internal, which means that they're going to be involved in some of the training. So is there a balance where we don't accidentally train the potential shooter?
That's a great question, Anthony. And this comes up a lot with a lot of schools use codes. They still use codes, code orange, code purple, code yellow. The problem with that is in a traumatic situation, sometimes we can get confused. Was it code purple? Does that mean I run out the window, or does it mean I lock down? So clear talk is good. And we used to think that when kids lock down, everybody locked down in the classroom, they should be silent, absolutely silent. But the reality is, since most of these shooters go to school with us, they know if they're there and there's a lockdown, they know there's kids in that room. And the key is to lock the door, cover the door window so they can't see in, because we see statistically, if they can't see in, it's like the dog and the rabbit. If you can't see the rabbit, you don't chase it. I know in Parkland, the cover on the window didn't cover all the way. He could see in, he shot through the window. And that's one of the only incidents where that ever happened. All right. So if we cover the window, get behind the things and lock down, that is our best defense, because they're going to go fast and they're trying to get in. If they can't get in, they're going to move on because they know who's coming. Right. So that's the kind of practicing that I think we need to do. It keeps people moving quick, and it's not a bad idea. They do know, these kids today all know, from kindergarten on, they know we're locking down. They know what we're doing. So we can't be concerned about that. We have to make sure everyone else moves quick and lock themselves in.
I also think with this, there's also a balance here too, because the preparation, obviously, when you're teaching people to prepare, that's where you're concerned about what knowledge is given to someone who's going to take advantage of that. But there's also immediate quick response. So, hopefully in the effort to teach people to prepare, there's also stuff being taught by the police in regards to response that a person that would be an active shooter from the school may not be aware of. And that kind of may balance it out. So we're still making an effort to provide safety. But if there is a threat, then you obviously have a team right now that's learning how to swiftly respond. Someone mentioned something real quick, Joe, and then I want to get to this other video. Does the training ever cover collateral damage?
And what do you mean by collateral damage?
If I had to take a guess, and tell me if I'm right, Anthony, with this, I don't know, but I'm assuming when it comes to collateral damage, are we talking about the aftermath of it all? Like, are we talking about what do we do once we've survived an active shooter? How do we take care of those that have dealt with such a horrendous concern? I could be guessing.
Let me look at it in two ways here. First of all, collateral damage. This conversation that has to be had amongst school personnel, police, and all of us who go anywhere together is the reality. When one of these events take place, the reason we practice and we try to understand what we can do is because there's going to be casualties. The whole idea of this is to limit the number of casualties, accidentally shooting others. Okay. The collateral damage here, and when you can look at this, if there's a shooter firing down the hallway at students, that's a bad thing. A cop gets there. Now, if when we practice in a school when there's no people there, the hallways are all clear. There's our role player, and we can see each other. In a real instant, there could be kids running everywhere, teachers, students, and the shooter don't care. The shooter's just going to shoot. We then, as law enforcement, what are we going to do? Fire into a crowd? We can't fire into a crowd. So there could be some collateral damage if you had that. And that's one of my concerns you said before about having teachers with guns. I'm not opposed to the concept of more people being prepared to fight back. But if you got people shooting in every direction, you're going to have friendly fire. You're going to have people hit in the crossfires. So that's kind of tough. But there could be, these are the kind of incidents, unfortunately, where people get killed. And we have to practice to respond fast, powerfully, and save as many people as we can, as quickly as we can. Time equals life. And that's the whole bottom line to this.
And Joe, I do want to get to that video. I have 2 videos I want to show, but let me ask you a question. With the response going, so you're right. You know, your job is to save lives, and then you also have to take out the shooter. What supersedes?
You got to stop that shooter first. So one of the things that we teach law enforcement officers, and it's a hard thing to learn. If there was an active shooter in the school and I get there and I can't get in, I don't have a key fob. I tell them crash the front door with the cop car and get in, get to the sounds of that gunfire. Because on the way, you might find someone who's already shot, a teacher, another student, and they're begging you for help. And we teach these officers, the first set of officers got to go past that person because we have to stop that shooter before they hurt any more people. The second set of officers coming in can then address the injured people. That's why starting to train across the country, EMTs in the hot zone, so that they can come in with body armor and go with the cops and peel off when there's an injured person. But that first group of cops has to go directly to the shooter and neutralize that threat as fast as possible.
All right, so let me show this other video, guys, real quick. Love to get your thoughts. We kind of touched on to it a little bit, but it's going to be about teachers carrying weapons. I think we have a very good, diverse panel here. I think we can give some pros and cons, but let's hear it from them first on the video, and then we'll go from there. So bear with me.
Ceasefire, ceasefire. When that active killer is in that classroom, that teacher can either have a pencil or they can have a gun.
Okay, guys, stand up. No, I think I did okay. It's my first live shooter simulation, you know, so hopefully next time it'll be better.
Those teachers that want that protection to use a firearm in a school, we provide the training and certification for them to do that.
One of the most visceral reactions to the recent shooting in Parkland, Florida, was to give teachers guns. And it's an idea that has divided the United States. So I've come to Arlington, Texas, to follow a group of teachers getting trained to carry a gun in their classrooms. And really, the question I have is a visceral one as well. Guns, teachers, can they really go together?
The 3 questions of when you have to decide, according to state law, to shoot, what are they? Do I have to do it? Do I have to do it now? Is there anything else I can do or I will die or be seriously injured, right?
This is Brian Proctor. He was a police officer for 20 years. Now retired, he's one of the only people in the country qualified to train teachers to defend their schools with guns.
There are killers in our environment. They will find the weakest people to be able to kill, the ones that are the most defenseless, and they will go after them. If you call 911, the killing's already started. You've got to have someone there when it starts to be able to mitigate that damage.
And these are the volunteers for the job. Among Brian's students, there's Norman Rangel, he's a principal, Jermaine Chambers, football coach, and JC Daly is a librarian at a high school. Now, each of them is already licensed to carry a gun, but to carry at school, they need to pass this training and get permission from their school board. First, I meet JC Daly.
Well, I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe we have a right to defend ourselves. I believe that if somebody is attacking us, you know, we don't just sit and huddle. I mean, we actually have skills and are empowered in this country to defend ourselves.
It was JC's idea to take this course. She volunteered. And part of her motivation, she tells me, is that she has 2 kids of her own.
You know, as a parent, I I would be, I would at least want to know that my kid's teacher was carrying a gun.
Questions? No. All right.
Now, the teaching here is done through pretend scenarios, with a killer trying to enter the classroom.
Ceasefire! Ceasefire!
So this is what they're shooting. They're training rounds. They're about 10 times as powerful as paintball rounds. But they actually do shoot. They hurt. That's why people are wearing these.
Now it's JC's turn.
Questions?
No.
Go, go, go!
Get over in the corner. Over in the corner. Get down, get over in the corner. Get chairs in front of you.
You ever been that stressed?
No.
How's your heart rate?
Oh, it's really high. My hands are shaking, my heart's pounding. My voice is shaking. I can feel it.
After seeing how shaken JC is, I wonder how realistic it is to ask teachers to go after shooters in schools. But Brian says that's not what he's trying to do.
The goal is not to find and go after the shooter. The goal is to protect the kids in their care in that classroom that they have control over. They are not trained to go after the killer.
Go, go, go!
Let's see how other teachers do. Here's Jermaine's scenario.
What's going on?
I coach football. Those are my sons. Those are my boys out there. I treat them like my kids. So if something comes in, I feel that it's my job to protect them all.
Ceasefire! Ceasefire!
How was that?
Oh,
You
yeah.
might hit me up here, but you didn't hit it one time right there.
Yeah, saw the big gun come in and you just, hey, protect them, shoot, hey, aim for the best.
You can have that, or you can have a pencil.
Pencil, what the pencil gonna do?
I mean, that's what Parkland found out too. All right.
What occurs to me, and as incredible as it sounds, the goal of the training is for the teachers to control the adrenaline rush, the fear, to be cool under pressure. The next part of getting teachers ready happens here. They each have to show that they can shoot accurately. But can you ever be ready to face a gunman?
Do you think your students or these teachers are ready? If something happens, if someone comes into their school with an AR-15?
I think nobody's ready for that. I don't think anybody's ready for that. I've been in combat situations. I'm telling you, I'm never ready for that. But you have to realize that there's no great solution. There's just a better response.
So what's the plan here?
So basically what we're going to do is the plan is we're going to set up these targets. We're going to shoot about 200 rounds. And out of these 200 rounds, I want to see a good percentage of them in the bad guy, not missed off the target, and not in our good kid.
Or they fail.
Or they fail. If you cannot get a good shot, don't pull it off. I don't care if you're left with ammo in the gun. I don't. What I care about is if you start missing your main target.
JC tells me she understands full well that taking her gun into her school is controversial.
A school, it's traditionally a safe place. I mean, it's where innocence is, it's our children. And so I think you have a great polarity there between a gun, which is such a visual image of violence and killing and hatred, and then innocent children. To me, I feel like it's my job to protect that innocence, to protect those kids that are in my care.
Line is ready. Make your gun safe. Okay, so here's how this runs out. Everybody here passed the proficiency. According to the Department of Public Safety, you passed the proficiency. So how do y'all feel?
Not satisfied.
If you're not satisfied with it, I'm a happy person. Because what would I be satisfied with if I was the one shooting this?
100%.
100%. That's what I would be satisfied for.
What do you, wow. What do you think?
Well, it's not very good. When I first came up and looked at it, of course I looked at my misses, but not knowing what those meant. And then I looked at that precious little baby with all of the holes in his head. I mean, I obviously did some damage to the bad guy too, but I need some practice. That's what I think.
Does it make it real? Does it make it more real looking at that? Like seeing our kid and the holes?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I have 7-year-old boys, so they're about that size. For sure. They just made it real. It's a big responsibility. It's a big responsibility.
Nick mentioned how this issue has divided the country. A survey by the Pew Research Center found 45% of American adults support arming teachers in schools, the other 55% against that.
So if I could add before we go, I think I know where the divide is. So if you watch the video clearly states that the teachers are holding their ground in defense. So they're not meant to be aggressive towards the target. So now when they pose this concern, it could be switched by the media that we're training teachers to be aggressive and attack. We're not. We're training them to defend their position. No different than you would train a person carrying, delivering money. You know, no different. You know, if someone comes at you, you're trained to defend your position. You know, but with that said, I think what happens here, people get confused because they see the teachers as going out there being Rambos, and that's not what they're told to do. They're told to hold your ground and protect the children. So at that point there, if people could literally understand that there's a difference, this because I think here is when you have the when you have the response team coming from the outside, the best way to defend are the people coming from the inside. We're not telling the people from the inside to go out and everybody take your shot and try to find the shooter. We're just trying to buy time for the people from the outside to do what they got to do. So I think the confusion has literally always been, are we teaching people to attack from inside? No, we're teaching them to defend. And if something happens and someone gets near the children, then they're in the best position to hold their ground and obviously become a less likely target because, again, most likely people are going in is because they feel it's vulnerable. So I want to go with Gary first and go around the table. But Gary, you know, I think the understanding of it all, if you see teachers as protecting the position, protecting the children, and which allows time for the outside team to come in and do what they got to do you see teachers well-trained and, again, volunteering to do it? It's not something that we'd force them on, but do you see this as a benefit if it's filtered correctly?
Well, Anthony, I think you explained it very well and very clear. They're absolutely standing their ground in their classroom. And then if they're trained properly, as they were in this video we just saw, you're not going out, you're not leaving your area, you're just standing your ground. Hopefully the shooter will bypass you. And if they don't, and our police officers are not into the school yet, or they're not on the active shooter yet, you have a fighting chance to survive and protect the students. Now, my daughter is a 3rd grade teacher. I'm not going to say where or what state, but she's a 3rd grade teacher. She was raised in a manner where she would volunteer to carry a gun. She's not uncomfortable with having a weapon. But not all teachers are like that. There are some teachers that are just absolutely scared of having a gun. So obviously, as you heard in the video, the officer who's training these teachers said, do you have to do this? No, you don't have to. But what do you want? A pencil or this if a shooter comes into your class? But if you're so uncomfortable with a weapon, and anybody who's been on the firing arms range for years, a firearms instructor, if you're so uncomfortable with a weapon, I'm telling you, my opinion only, folks out there, you're better off not giving that person a gun. So Of course, it's strictly by the teachers volunteering, and we need those teachers that are not afraid to step up like these teachers we saw in the video, but absolutely not if you're in fear of guns and so much against it, don't do it, in my opinion, because it could end up being a risky situation for that type of person to have a gun in their possession with the school kids. Just my opinion again.
And what's your thoughts on this, Ann? I'm very curious. You as a teacher yourself, knowing that I believe, as I said, one position is kind of like the buy time, the team's coming, but I think the position for the teachers is to be on the defense, you know, and basically if someone comes into that room, you know, to make sure they could do whatever they can to defend the children. But what's your thoughts on that as a teacher?
So I personally do support the Second Amendment, and, you know, in ways at least protecting our homes, by the use of a gun if need be. And I do like the idea of if you're comfortable with it, you can get the training. However, as teachers, we're taught things more like how to help a child with reading, how to help a child with math or writing. And there's some training for social emotional needs, but even that training isn't that strong. And so to add something like this kind of training even for volunteers could get a little tricky. As various people, both in the comments and the videos and our discussions have said, you don't know what's going to happen until you're actually in that moment of where you have to protect yourself or those kids. Like that one female teacher in the video, I'd be curious to see if they did an active shooter situation like they practice in class where they're actually firing blanks with one of her sons being held hostage. How would she respond then? Would she have a very different reaction? And then end up perhaps shooting someone else's kid in the attempt to protect her own? Because that could happen. And I'll give the example of restraint training. I am trained to intervene and restrain a child who's acting in a way that is not safe for themselves or other students or staff. I had to intervene today for a child who was beaten on me and our assistant principal and other kids and attacking them. And so when you are actually, as much as you practice, when you're actually in that situation, it takes you a second to remember, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do to help protect myself and other kids. So in arming individual teachers, I'm not so sure. But maybe having a few people whose primary job, maybe some security personnel type ideas to help protect the teachers and the kids in schools, where that's more of their focus, maybe something like that. So we can have some people to help buy that time that the law enforcement needs to get to the active shooter, but it's not on the responsibility of, you know, a larger portion of the staff.
And what's great about this, guys, I want people to realize something. So whether it's arming the teacher or having people there that's their specific function, we're still talking about defending the inside. You know, and it gets so crazy where I wasn't even thinking about adding those SROs in just yet because, you know, there's been a push to not have people armed at all. So then it's like, oh, your mind gets so put in this box that the obvious solution, it gets twisted because, again, people have their own agendas and then they try to, well, we can't arm teachers. Well, wait a second. Why are we even at that point? You know, what's going back to those SROs? Why aren't we having people that are trained for that function? But having said that, I want people to know, if you realize that both have agreed that we need something inside to basically either buy time or defend those students. Now, Joe, I wanted to add something to your question as well. It comes from Eric S. Will armed teachers save more lives or result in more avoidable deaths? I thought maybe you can put that into your answer.
I got to say, the video I thought showed us a lot. Here we had 3 people that already had concealed carry permits. And they were obviously the ones to say, hey, I'll do this, because the answer seems easy. I'll get a gun and I'll protect myself. I like the concept of the teacher in the room. If somebody's coming in, at least there's a good guy gun on that side of the thing. Highly trained. And the fact that they were all CCW carriers already, when they went out there and shot the targets and she hit the little boy, you could see she was physically shaken, that maybe she hasn't practiced enough at that point. And I'm not putting her down. I'm just saying that reaction of hers was pretty realistic. I did think that when she took her initial position behind that door, that I'm saying this woman is going to take this guy right out. This is going to be fantastic. But then the reality of seeing the gun, you saw how people, oh my gosh, there's a gun here, and she couldn't shoot, she couldn't aim, and he got her. So is it going to add more unavoidable deaths? I think that's always a potential when you have more people with guns. I'm law enforcement and I'm coming in. We got to remember, the men and women in law enforcement that are coming into that school, they don't want to die either. They're doing their job. And if they don't know who the shooter is and you got somebody firing a weapon, now you have an opportunity for another. It happens in law enforcement. That's why the cops have to wear color of the day and they have to identify themselves in some way when they're doing undercovers, because you see a person with a gun, your reaction is going to be to eliminate that person with the gun. So I think there's a need for weapons in the school. Highly trained individuals, whether it be security officers or specific teachers who can be specifically trained principals, I think that would probably be okay with heavy amount of training. When you think about you first come on the job, we're not used to carrying guns. I didn't carry a gun when I was 20 years old. I became a cop. They taught me how to shoot. They taught me the responsibility of that gun. And to this day, I carry a gun every day of my life. It's second nature to me, and I'm comfortable with it. But I didn't start out that way. I had to learn. So you can train people, and having a good guy gun or a good girl gun inside the school is definitely better than not. It's just who. When I became a school security director, I went to the school board. They liked me very much. I said, listen, I'm allowed to carry a gun. I'd like to carry my gun in the school. And they said, well, let's table that. We don't know if we want a gun in the school. And then a couple of incidents happened in the country, and they called me in. They said, Lieutenant Joe, carry your gun. What do we need to do to help you to carry your gun in the school? Because they wanted a good guy gun that they can trust. And that's a big issue. Who can you trust to make sure you don't have that friendly fire, to make sure that people do the right things? But, the reality is you got a guy in there with a gun and nobody else, then we're all just victims. Mm-hmm. So there is a middle ground here, but we can't knee-jerk react. Arm these people, don't arm these people, do this, don't do it, train this one, train that, take away the guns, give all the guns. We have to calm down and take a deep breath and look at what really happens during these events and figure out how can we slow them down, how can we take them out, and how can we protect everybody inside. And we can do some of those things. Unfortunately, in some of the most recent examples we saw, like Max Schachter said, a complete failure because you have human beings involved. Let me tell you a quick story about a training, Anthony. We had a training with a university that was close by me. And because we did this all the time in my town, they asked if we could help. And they had a dorm, and they were going to do an active shooter event in the dorm. And they had a stereo system at the far end of the hallway that was making gunshot sounds that were so loud, it was shaking the building like a rifle really going off. And we had 3 towns involved. And the 3 officers from my town, 2 of them were on the county SWAT team. And when we put out this call, everybody came running. They showed up, shooters in the building. They could hear the gunshots. They go running up the stairs. The sergeant leading the way gets to the top of the stairs and stops and pushes his officers back against the wall as I'm watching him. And he's looking down the hallway as the gunshots are going off. And I looked at him. I said, Sergeant, you have to move. And it was like a recognition. They ran down the hallway and interacted. He was devastated when that was over. I said, why did you stop? You didn't see a shooter. He wasn't shooting at you, and people were being killed. Why didn't you continue up the hallway? And he said, it was so realistic that my first thought was, this guy's going to step out and kill my people. I have to protect them. And I said, that's not your job. Your job was to go blazing down that hallway. And if he pops out, you light him up and you keep moving. And he was devastated, this poor officer, because he trained for this. But when it became real, and that's why realism is important in training, that, it inoculates you to fear. That's another thing they said here. You can't be afraid. Inoculation to fear is why we practice over and over, and we amp it up a little bit at a time, so that we're used to it. Okay, we kind of get the pressure of it, and then we can do better and better.
Yeah, I want to mention something too, guys. So there's going to be a lot of what if scenarios here, and you have to ask yourself what's probable versus what's really likely. I mean, yes, the active shooter could drop the gun, and someone else could pick it up, and I mean, there could be so many situations that would make people say, well, that's why we can't go right in. But guys, I mean, the point is, you still have to go in, and those decisions have to be made. My biggest concern that I've always had is that sometimes you have policies and procedures that conflict. So let's say an active shooter that decides that, well, I want to go in and get the most I can. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the fire alarm. That's going to get everybody out, and that's going to give them open target for me. So how do we deal with the policies? Like a fire drill will tell everybody to leave the building, but now for an active shooter, that may be what they want, because that puts everybody kind of going towards them. So how do you make sure that you have fail safes for the policies that are going to bring everybody out towards the active shooter? So if you don't mind, I'll go first with Gary. I like to go to Joe last because he's the main person. So I'll go to Gary. I'd love to get Anna's opinion on that if she has one, and I'm sure she does. And then Joe. So Gary, what's your thoughts on like the policies that filter people right to an active shooter?
Well, Anthony, as you said, there's so many what ifs. Your organization or agency you've got to think of every possible scenario you can and train. Like my sheriff's department, twice a year we had to go through with the Joe and I were talking about this before the show started. We did realistic training scenarios. We did one set the first part of the year in the courthouse, and then we went down to the training center and used our training building as if it was a school, or as if it was a courtroom, if that may be the case that we're working on that day. And we did all these different training scenarios. We even did training scenarios on when you go in after the active shooter and you finally approach the active shooter, and the active shooter puts the gun to their own head. You have to think of all these scenarios, and that one you just mentioned about there's a fire alarm and everybody's exiting the building has to be one of those scenarios as well. So what you have to hope for is that your agency has a very good training department. They have trainers that think outside the box. That's the term I like to use in training. Think outside the box. Don't just stick to the basic, this is going to happen or it could happen. You have to think outside the box and do many different training scenarios. Now, our sheriff here has always taught from day one. I think Eric Bernard said it actually earlier on a comment. Time wasted is lives wasted. We are going to immediately go in and engage that active shooter as quickly as possible. This is a term a lot of people don't like. It's not my term, but I kind of like it. The sheriff said, we will shoot you graveyard dead when we find you. Well, I'm going to tell you, folks, that may be a harsh term, but I don't think so, because I don't want any children or teachers or officers or emergency medical technicians responding to this active shooter scene to be killed. If somebody has to go down and die, it's got to be the active shooter. Now, if that's too harsh, then I don't know what we're doing all this for, because isn't this what we're after? Stop the threat, right? And Anthony, great thing. Yes, we have to think of every possible scenario and train for it.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are certain scenarios that are highly unlikely, and you may want to devote your energy, but really it's going to be discretionary. I mean, at that point, they're highly unlikely. You can't deal with every what if situation as much as you like to try, but what is most probable? And I think that fire alarm thing matters. And I like what Alicia said, because this is what I was also trying to get at too, was that there's a way to verify whether the drill is official. So if you have a fire drill, there should be something overhead from a trusted system that allows you to know that, hey, guys, start evacuating, because the last thing you want is for people, I think this is a big concern. The last thing you want is for people just to evacuate and then give the shooter what they want. But I want to go with Ann next. Ann, what's your thoughts on all this?
So as you guys were saying earlier, or just a moment ago, that you do need to try and think of these situations and what are you going to do? As far as using the fire alarm, there is a team, at least in our school, there's two different teams actually with walkie-talkies, and we can confirm with one another via walkie-talkie, yeah, let's go out, or stay in place, and using codes to, excuse me, in codes to say, do not follow that, stay in the building, if there is a dangerous situation. And you can practice, for like, yes, okay, the fire alarm was pulled and the shooter's outside. The shooter pulled the alarm. What are we going to do now? And actually today, I was pursuing that child I was talking about earlier who was aggressing towards staff and students. And also I was thinking about it yesterday when we had a fire drill is, well, what if we had a situation where there's someone outside and they're shooting? We do need to practice for that, and that's something I actually will be taking back to school and saying, if this happens, what exactly are we going to do? Not exactly, but we need to have some kind of plan in place as to how are we going to respond. But also, again, being situationally aware. As teachers, yeah, we're teaching, we're encouraging kids. Okay, stop staring outside the window. Yes, it's a pretty bird, but focus over here. But being aware of who's out and about. I've been outside at recess and I see people just walking their dog on school property, and that's not allowed. And I have had to tell someone once or twice, excuse me, school's in session right now. You cannot be on school property without our express permission. And they left. But you might think, oh, they're walking their dog. Well, how do I know that's not a cover? And so just being situationally aware that there's someone walking around that I don't recognize, and letting someone who has the authority to go out and the means. And so again, that could be where SROs come into play, is to go talk to that person, say, hey, excuse me, can we help you? What are you doing here? We actually had a situation where an unidentified person a couple of years ago, and no harm, was on the playground with kids out at recess, and we called on the walkie. Our team, which I'm part of, goes outside, everyone inside, in, let's go, keep walking, get inside, stop talking. And we got inside safely, no big deal. But something like that is something we would need to try and practice. And Alicia's asking the question, do we have a plan for both inside and outside? Yes. I won't go into great details tonight, but we do have plans for, okay, situation outside is not safe, we're just going to stay within the building. Situations where we continue to teach, which actually happened today with that student who's not behaving in a safe manner. And there's a situation within the building, where are you going to go? And again, it really does come back to that situational awareness. Okay, I'm here. My office, for example, is in a spot where the threat's in the building. I'm a sitting duck. I have to go through multiple points to get to an outside door. But just knowing in each place where you could be in the building, how am I going to get out? Where can I take the kids to? And where can I go for help?
Yeah, and I want to mention something too. And by the way, thanks for sharing that, Anna. Joe, I just want to mention something too. I think I'd love to get your opinion on this. One thing is that we have these preventive measures, and we'll get to that. And we have all these different drills. If we treat them isolated, we don't realize how these different drills or different policies can bleed into each other and then can wind up posing a greater threat. So, I mean, if we're developing these policies in total isolation, like a fire drill specifically here, that's a fire drill. And okay, and then active shooter specifically here, like in the prison setting, we always make sure that when we develop something, it doesn't leave us vulnerable somewhere else. The policies and procedures usually have multiple people at the table. We have some upstream thinking right away. And basically it's okay, we implement this, be advised, this leaves us vulnerable here. So do you feel that when we are developing their policies, there should be, we should be more in tune with how those policies could affect other areas or other concerns?
There's a lot packed in here with everybody's been saying in your questions, Anthony. Yes. The reality is we have to understand what is our purpose to do this when it happens. So let's deal with the fire alarm thing first, because that's a policy that could bleed over. Is it a fire alarm? Is it an active shooter? One of the things that I tell people, it is my opinion, is that if you go into lockdown first, you do not respond to the fire alarm. If there's a fire in an area, there's a real fire, and somebody sees it, they will be able to respond and run out of the room, and then it's not an active shooter. But if you have an active shooter, that the historical record is what we have to look to, because you said before, all these what if scenarios, there's a million of them. And that's why understanding the historical record of these attacks, what actually happens during these attacks. So a couple things have come up. We saw in Paducah, Kentucky, one of the first ones, there were two young men came in, pulled the fire alarm, and they were going to shoot kids as they came outside. So there's the fire alarm thing right there. That's where I think it came to our attention. In Columbine, it was actually a bombing. They wanted the bombs to go off, and as the kids ran out, shoot them, and the bombs didn't work. They went in and shot people. So if you are in a lockdown situation and you hear that fire alarm, obviously you could be funneling yourself right to the bad guy. How many times have they actually done that? Well, other than the couple of examples I said, they don't really do that. They go in, they're usually young people, usually young men, and they're trying to do their attack. They're not considering all. The other one that I see, there's a code that the principal has to say the code 3 times or something, so you know the principal's not taken hostage. That has never happened. Nobody's taken anybody hostage saying, telling everybody open up the door and so I can shoot them. So we have to look at the reality. What do these things happen? So if there's a shooter and you know there's a shooter, you lock down. You lock yourself down unless you see fire. And if you see fire, then maybe you're going to make that move. There's fire in my room. We have to get out of here because there's actually a fire. And then you're taking a chance of going in the hallway. Other than that, you're locked down. Maybe it is the bad guy pulling a fire alarm. All right. We know that in Parkland, the fire alarm went off before they knew there was a shooter because people couldn't hear it. And they never called the lockdown when they did see shooting. And it wasn't a fire alarm that he pulled, but from the gunshots, it was shaking dust loose and the fire alarms went off. And then people poured into the hallways where that was. So when we think of the events that could happen, we have to think of what is our purpose here. If there's a shooter, we have to lock down and be safe until good guys or bad guys, good girls get there to save everybody. If you're inside the building, do you flee? That's another one. There's some people that teach the first thing you should do is put children out the window and let them run. Well, what age? If a teacher puts out first graders or second graders and tells them run to the woods, you have a couple problems. Number one, are the kids really going to run? What if the teacher can't get out the window with them? What if the kids do run and there's a creek out there? There's a highway. There's another problem. The kids get lost. Now you got kids all over the place in the middle of a shooter situation. So it is fluid, but we have to have the idea of locking down, and that's what we do. Is a fire alarm, unless there's a fire that we see, we stay where we're at. When we look at all these other potentials, study each event, and it's a terrible thing, but that's how we learn from each event. We went from 4 cops assembling to 1 cop now going. The first officer gun on scene should go after the shooter. That's because we've learned over time that time equals life. We have to move quicker. We have to be prepared for any eventuality. I like what Anna says about every place that you go in that school, you should know where you can hide, where you can lock down. If you're outside on the football field and there's a shooter in the school, you're obviously not going to go back in. You're going to go, you have to have rally points. Do you have set rally points where you could get buses to evacuate people, right? You go through the woods and there's a trail and over there's a neighborhood, and that's where you would go to meet if you were outside. The concepts here can be boiled down, if I could offer this out to everybody. When you get asked this a lot, what are the things we can do? How do we make this happen? I tried to boil it down, and I wrote an article about it, and it's called the 3 Pillars of Survival. And if we cover these 3 pillars of survival, it gives us a really good chance, right? So the first one is preparation. The first pillar of survival is preparation. We have to be prepared mentally. We have to prepare with drills that really mean something, not just checking off the box. We have to have the right equipment in place. There's salesmen out there that'll sell you everything in the world. Some things you need, some things you don't. So we have to understand what equipment technology can actually help us in this situation. That's preparation. Then the next thing you have is communication. How do you let everybody in that building know there is a threat? A teacher on the 2nd floor sees a kid approaching with a gun. How does that teacher tell everybody in the building, lock down, there's a kid coming. We have something going on here with a weapon. So there's electronic devices you can use. There's push buttons, all kinds of things. And then the 3rd pillar is notification. How do we call for the good guy and good girl guns? Now, if you think about those three pillars and you address them in your policy and your procedures and what you're doing, you will see you'll go a long way in answering some of these questions. How do we prepare? What equipment do we have? How do we talk to each other during the event? And how do we call for help? And thank you for putting that up there. That was it was a way to combine all these questions that I get all the time to try and help at least give somebody a basic understanding. Where do we start? There's a place to start.
Yeah, guys, easy article to find. Just Google 3 pillars of, what was that?
Survival.
3 pillars of survival. And it just popped up even without putting your name in. So guys, I want to do one more question before we get to our last video. And I want to ask this to Joe real quick. Hey, Joe, a lot of the questions in here, we're talking about preventive measures, but also measures that create more of an obstacle for an active shooter, like bulletproof windows, secure doors, whatever it is. I think the biggest concern here is that as much as we want to create those obstacles for those active shooters, we also have to be aware those obstacles could also be obstacles for the people that have to respond, right? So is there a balance? What type of technology should school have? What are things that they should have in play? But what are things that they got to be wary of? Because if not done correctly, the response team may have a problem.
Right. So when we lock down, we're going to lock our building down. Somebody sees something, somebody hears something, and they lock down. Now the officers are arriving. So a lot of districts I have seen have put like the Knox box outside with a key, or the officers have a fob to get into the school. All right. Or they have biometrics and the officers are on the school biometrics. So they can run up, put their thumb down, hit a fob, and the officers get access to the school. There's a product out there. I have nothing to do with this product. So I'm just telling you, I saw it and I'm amazed by it. It's called 911 Inform. It's a situation where when you put the school in lockdown, anybody that's within that school geofence calls 911, the dispatcher sees the cameras and can hit the button and lock the school down, can also guide the officers directly to what room. Go to room 32 and can unlock that door so the officers can get in the building. There is lots of technology out there now. When I teach my officers and I say, listen, you roll up to that building and you can't get in the front door, you don't have a key, and you hear gunshots, you have to get in, right? Crash the police car into the door, knock the door down. We'll buy another door, get in that school. Right. But I see a lot of people using the knock boxes or the fobs. As far as getting out, I had that question the other day. Somebody was concerned and said, listen, we locked the school down. What if the kids can't get out? Well, you can always get out from inside the school. The doors are built that way. When you hit the bar, you're getting out. We just want to keep them from coming in. One point of entry into the school, and it has to be monitored. You know, what I see when I go to these schools, they say they have a very nice family person, somebody from a family in the school, sitting at a little vestibule in the front, and a person walks up and they buzz them and they walk right into school, and then they ask them, what are you here for? Right? We have to vet people outside the school. Who are you? What are you doing here? One of the things that we never think about, and it's happened in schools, is the potential of domestic violence. Right? We have husband and wife are having a problem. You don't want to tell everybody. Your husband shows up at the school, they let him right in because it's Bob. Everybody knows Bob's Mary's husband. He goes to the classroom and kills Mary and an 8-year-old boy. Happened in California a few years ago. If anyone's going to visit, the staff should make sure people at the front desk know, hey, my cousin's coming, my child's coming. If they're not on the list, you don't let them in until you call that teacher and say, hey, Bob's out front. That's when you'll hear about domestic violence or some other problems. Don't let him in, right? Keep them outside. You asked about bulletproof glass, Anthony. This is a fantastic piece of equipment. It is so prohibitively expensive to do the doors and the windows and everything with glass. And that's a reality. Schools don't have billions of dollars. There is stuff out there. It's called window glazing. It's crystal clear. You put it on the glass. You can't see it. You can shoot through it, but the glass doesn't drop and break. So a guy my size, I'm a big guy. If I go up to that door with a 20-pound sledgehammer and I start hitting that door with this glazing on it, it's going to take 2 to 3 minutes for that glass to drop out of that window. In 2 to 3 minutes, you see somebody bashing at the door or shooting through it, you know you have danger. You call a lockdown. You start the process. So window glazing is very inexpensive. A lot of different manufacturers. So all of this, and I know a lot of people have these questions. And let me tell you, here's where you start, everybody. Get a threat assessment done. Get a good quality one done. Now, a lot of our law enforcement agencies do them. I did them. When I was a cop, I would go around and do them for businesses and stuff. The problem is I didn't have all day. I couldn't have a week to spend time. Get a good threat assessment, identify your gaps, and then create a roadmap to fix them. Do you need every piece of equipment they're trying to sell you? You probably don't. Do you need some basic things? So I talk about what can you do tomorrow for little or no money to keep yourself safe. Lock your doors. People still don't lock their doors. Lock the doors. One point of entry. Put window glazing on stuff. Have drills of real value. Make sure everybody knows what to do. And then involve your police. Make sure sometimes the police aren't close with the schools. Make sure you liaison with them. Have them write their reports in front of the school. We know that omnipresence. Bad guy sees a cop, they go to another school. I put a coffee pots in my schools so they could come by and have coffee. I wanted the cops walking around because their presence there. So we have to think about what can we do right away that can help people. So I hope that kind of answered some of your questions there.
Yeah, I actually have I'm looking at a video on YouTube about window glazing. It was really called just Security Glass for Schools. It's a live demo. So if you guys go on YouTube, YouTube has a bunch of videos. If you put window glazing school security, it has a lot of videos that show you exactly what that does. It was interesting. Guys, I want to show you one last video. It's another controversial area of the recent shooting, especially in Texas, but not just Texas. It's happened before where there's been a delayed response and people not understanding why the response could be delayed. So again, not talking so much about the Texas incident, but what we could do is I'm going to show you the video first, but then maybe we could discuss why people may not go in right away. Some parts we've actually discussed prior, but we could revisit real quick. But I'd like to show you one more video. It's the last video I got, and it's called We Don't Wait Outside. This was just aired.
Expected to select the person who will lead its review of law enforcement's response to the Uvalde shooting, that according to two sources familiar with that process.
The Department of Justice has previously conducted reviews similar to this. After-action reviews is what they're called, on the mass shootings in San Bernardino, California in 2015, also following the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando in 2016. Joining us now is one of the people involved in conducting those reviews, Frank Straub. He is the director for the National Policing Institute Center for Targeted Violence Prevention. Frank, good morning and thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
What can these reviews accomplish that can actually help going forward?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that DOJ has taken a very important step here. We need an independent, objective, fair, and comprehensive review of what took place in Texas. And we need to bring subject matter experts to the table to look at prevention, the response, and the recovery from this event.
Let me ask you this, because there are a number of questions that are key here. The police say they did not go in because they made a judgment, one that leaders there now say was the wrong judgment, but a judgment that all the kids inside that classroom were dead. In other words, it become less a active shooter situation, more of a hostage situation. We know that's not true because there were multiple 911 calls, and now we have this audio that CNN has obtained that appears to be another child inside that classroom. Would that information have gotten to police on the scene? And if it didn't, is that a command issue? Is that an information sharing issue?
Well, whether those phone calls were getting out, and as you said in a previous report that they may have been on the Border Patrol radio, really the state of the art right now is when you have an active shooter incident, your job as a police officer, whether you're the first one on the scene or you're part of a larger group, is to stop the shooting, stop the bleeding, and which means you have to go to where the gunfire is coming from. You have to neutralize the shooter or shooters, and then immediately start to treat the victims.
There At this point, Frank, are no national guidelines to standardize law enforcement's training and response to active shooter situations. You've got, 18,000 different law enforcement agencies across country. I understand that that can be tricky, and some may say it's not needed. I wonder if you think it's needed.
I think that there is a general agreement in law enforcement, there has been since Columbine,
Yeah.
that we take immediate action, that we don't wait outside. In most states, and I had the privilege of serving in New York and Indiana and the state of Washington in law enforcement leadership roles. In all of those states, the protocols were very much similar and very much established. And we trained our officers to respond to these situations over and over and over again, to the point of really very intense simulations in terms of using actors and volunteers as victims, having to force entry, not waiting for a tactical team to get there, but to go in. But we also have to remember that if we're putting that kind of demand on officers, they need to be equipped properly. They need to have ballistic vests, they need to have ballistic helmets, and they have to have the firepower that's going to match the assailants. And too often what we see is a patrol officer, an administrative officer, or a collection thereof arriving at these scenes, and they're outgunned and they're unprotected.
But Frank, forgive me, Frank. That was not the situation here. We saw dozens of officers. They had ballistic vests. They had big guns. So we know that did not apply here. I wonder, at what point does this become not just an unfortunate police response, but a criminally negligent one, or a negligent, at least administratively, right? That this is not.
Obviously, as you see, it goes right to whatever that agenda is. At this point here, you do want to hear what the expert says, because even though that may not have been specifically what could be seen, it's still good for us to know how the response is. But obviously, you have media that leads towards whatever that agenda is. And unfortunately, as you watch this interview, it's sad, but it looks like they already have a bias against the police. It's pretty obvious on that. And again, no response is going to be perfect, guys. I mean, here's the funny thing about it all, guys. The reason why there's so many different policies and procedures across the country is because of politicians. I mean, let's be honest. Each person that, when it comes to law enforcement mandates and stuff like that, you think the people that are involved in law enforcement are the ones making those policies and procedures? We're not. So when it comes to when they're saying, oh, there's 19,000, I'd be quick to say, well, look at the legislators then. Because, even if we try to push something consistent, they wind up making it their own thing. And next thing you know, we have all these individualized policies based on one generalized, what is now a generalized incident. The sad thing is, guys, is in this country especially, is that if there is an accident or something happens, instead of holding the incident accountable, the people accountable, what do? They tend to generalize the failure at the highest level possible, and then it starts affecting the agencies that are working well. So now you get people that are disenfranchised that didn't need to make changes. But let's go ahead and make changes because, at this point, let's affect everything. It happens in corrections. You can have an incident with an inmate that, okay, granted, it wasn't the right thing to do, let's say at this one facility, but now they go to implement a change that affects facilities that never had that problem. And it's just this generalized response that really does kill our ability to be effective, because in the end, it makes us more hesitant to respond, because the last thing we want is, we don't want to be the reason for a scapegoat, because as you can see here, the news media seems to know a lot more about what we need to do. And unfortunately here now we become hesitant in our response because we're afraid that at the end, it's not about, most of these people are not afraid to run in. They know what the job entails. They want to run in. They're afraid of the consequences behind them running in and being judged Monday morning by people who don't know how to do the job. So sometimes when you see people that are hesitant to run in, these are some of the bravest people in the world. But some of them become hesitant because at the end of the day, their effort to run in winds up making them like as if they're criminal. Just as bad. So, again, when it comes to the hesitancy, I'll start with Gary and go around the table. I believe that, again, not so much with the Texas incident, but I want people to know we had an incident a while ago, guys, where people were questioning why in corrections there was a delayed response to a code that involved multiple inmates. They expected us to go in and just handle the business, not realizing that we could go in an effort to save and protect, but wind up putting things more at risk. And I think that's what the public may not always see. Sometimes, as much as we may want to run in directly, we have to also ask ourselves, is our running in going to cause, let's say in this case, the shooter to be more impulsive? Hey, if they run in now, game's over, I'm going to start shooting everybody. We don't know why someone may not want to run in at that moment. But again, it's not so black and white where you just go in guns a-blazing. So when it comes to a delayed response, Gary, what's your thoughts? What are some of the reasons why someone would be hesitant going in?
Well, first of all, I just want to say poor Frank. I just don't think Frank was the right guy to be interviewed on that. But that's who they got. But I want to tell you, Anthony, you and I have done videos, and Russ Hamilton have done videos on this same topic, but inside the prison, hesitation. Sometimes as prison officers or law enforcement officers, we're always taught, don't rush in. Let's assess the situation before we run right in heads first. And yeah, that makes sense, right? But when these school shootings come in and we know there's a shooter in that school, in my opinion, I think it's a totally different scenario, and it's absolutely unacceptable to stand by and wait. When my 5 grandchildren go to school, I'm expecting them to be kept care of and to come home safe, right? All of us are that way with our children and grandchildren. So if I arrive on the scene, this is just my opinion as a correctional officer and then working for the sheriff's department, and all I have is my Glock 40 and my taser, but I know that there's children in trouble, teachers in trouble in there, I've got to go in. I know that someone in that video, it might have been Frank, we have to have equal firepower. Well, I may not be able to wait for equal firepower. So I think one of the things that does hurt on these situations is people want to assess the situation first. They're taking too much time by doing that. Wasted time is wasted lives. And the other thing that I noted here, as I said, you said scapegoat. They're worried about making a mistake. How many times, Anthony, have we talked about in some of our videos in the prison system? They're worried about, am I going to get in trouble for defending myself against this inmate because he's going to strike me? And now the officer is in the hospital, right? Same situation. Am I going to get in trouble if I make the wrong decision? Now I'm hesitating. We cannot hesitate when it comes to schools and children and teachers when their risks are at life. We just can't hesitate in these situations. So Joe can probably explain better, and Anna, how they would love to train better. They can explain the training part better, how Anna can tell how it's done in the school, and Joe can tell how we need to train these officers to not hesitate in these situations. And I'll stop there. One other thing that I want to mention real quick, it was back on the other topic, just short, and I'm done. Shooters are not the only incidents. We just had 4 weeks ago a person with mental illness come into the elementary school, I won't say which one, here in Florida, with an axe. My friend, who's a retired deputy, who is now one of those guardians in that new program here in Florida, because we're arming guardians and officers in the schools here, which I think is great. We have to have prevention right there on the spot. He was able to talk this guy down without incident. And Anna and somebody else were talking about outside the school. Well, he was outside. He was on school grounds, but he was outside. We don't just have gun incidents, folks. We have people coming in with knives and axes, as I just explained.
Yeah, and guys, as I said, again, you could put all those preventive measures up, but people are going to find ways to circumvent. That's what they do. If you're, working in the prisons, one thing I've learned is that the more obstacles you put in place, the more inmates become innovative and circumvent. I think if you have someone that is dedicated to doing this, they have planned it out, and every obstacle you put, they found ways around it. So, it's like we could always do whatever we can. Don't get me wrong. We don't want to make it easy for them. We don't want to make it where they could just walk in and do something. But when you go back, I like to think that nothing's impossible. You could have all these measures in play, but it's going against a person who could have thought this out for a while and said, okay, well, if they do this, this, and this, I'm going to be able to do this, this, and this. So I wish it would be like, you know, you could make the solutions that they can never circumvent. But if somebody wants to do it, they're going to become innovative and find a way to do it. Hey, Anna, what's your thoughts?
So as far as like we were talking a little bit earlier about like being able to someone hesitating before responding, as far as like being able to restrain students who is potentially a harm to themselves or harm to others, we are actually taught, well, try to de-escalate first. Look at the situation. What is the risk? Possibility. So is there a high chance of someone becoming harmed? Yes, no, maybe, somewhere in the middle. Or is there a low risk of that? And of the risk that is, like, what is the risk actually is? Like, okay, so they're leaning over a second-story banister over a concrete floor. Okay, that's kind of a high-risk situation. And the risk of being seriously hurt is what we're actually looking for, is pretty high. You fall from that, there's a pretty good chance of very serious harm being done. However, even when we've been trained, we are sometimes hesitant to intervene, because if I attempt to intervene saying, oh my gosh, this child is going to fall 2 stories onto concrete, but because I'm going to go try and pull the student back, if the student sees me, jumps, and falls over, I can be now held liable, even though I used my training and I used risk assessment and did everything I was trained to do. This child falls, now I'm in trouble. And that's something people are very much afraid of, is, you know, if I assess wrong, what's going to happen to me? And it's an unfortunate situation, but it's really true. And so if we try to put in as many safeguards for everyone in place as we possibly can, that might really help too. Like when we've had active shooter training, we actually had a police officer come in, this was a few years ago, and we were told, hey, as teachers, if your self-protective instinct kicks in and you just take off, and you're not putting yourself between the kids and, you know, and the active shooter, you're not going to be held responsible for these kids' deaths or injuries should they be shot. So while we do need to take some time to assess, like the student I was going after today, I'm trying to assess what he's doing. Like, okay, are we calm? Should I just let you just wear yourself out, pulling the branches from the tree? Or do I need to intervene? Liability insurance, only so much that we have. And once you have that mark against your name, that could be it for you for your entire career, unfortunately. But this child eventually went after the other students coming back from a field trip, started trying to hit them with a stick. Other teachers attempted to intervene. I was not quite as fast as this child. He was incredibly fast. He tackled another student. He got into a line of students. This is an 8-year-old child who's able to think through all these steps. So if an 8-year-old child can do this, so can adults. So we can put in as many protocols as we can in place, but someone could get around them. But if we put too many in place, it's harder to intervene. This child actually, that was trying to prevent from hurting others, tackled another student, started dragging him by the leg. The time I got to him, he was gone. And so, you know, trying to intervene with that child and stop him from hurting others, but also the concern is, are we traumatizing other students by restraining this child who is clearly trying to hurt them in front of other students? There's so many what ifs and so much the possibility of litigation and wrongly placed responsibility that a lot of people freeze. So I think one of the things we have to do is put a lot of safeguards in for those who are acting and try and pull back on, okay, you know what, well, we did the best we could, but there's only so much we can do.
The greater concern here is that it's a shame where we don't know how to respond because we're more concerned about the subjective interpretation of consequences. You know, I think that to me is where the biggest issue is, where we all should be on the same page as to what the greatest consequence it is, what the greatest consequence is. But when we're not, and we all have this different perspective of what the greatest consequence is. I mean, even what you said, I'm going to save this life, but if I restrain the child, how will the other children perceive it? We shouldn't even be thinking of that, to be honest with you, because I think the child at this point, if the child poses a threat to themselves or others, automatically we should react and save that child from himself or save others from that child. But now we get these other what ifs, and then you get people who may say, well, you know what, I know you did this, but you know, what about how it looked at the for the other kids? It's like, yeah, but you know, at this point here, we all should be in agreement that the greater consequence is this. I think that to me is where we're at with law enforcement responses in general, what we do in corrections in general, is that people see 20 million what if consequences, things that may not even have occurred, could have, but didn't. And when we act on something that we feel in the moment is the greater consequence, subjectively through our mind, through our training, through our experience, we get judged because someone else will give a what if that wasn't even near happening, but could have happened. And now the problem is, because no one really knows what consequence has the greatest weight, we start to become confused, because it's crazy how we could think that I'm going to go save this person's life, or I'm going to go eliminate this threat, right? This is what I want to do. Why am I stopping and hesitating? Because I'm more concerned about another consequence that's highly unlikely, that may not happen, because now I have other people in my head telling me you got to worry about this, this, or this. Yeah, but I thought the priority in our business is always to save lives. So as long as I'm able to justify the consequence that this had to be done in an effort to save lives, you tell me where the greater consequence would be than that. Hey, what's your thoughts on all this, Joe? Hesitation, stuff like that?
Well, I'll tell you, the reality, anybody who understands law enforcement, what keeps a community safe is proactive police work. Now, proactive police work is what makes sure that officers catch people before they do a burglary, gets drunk drivers before they crash and kill your family. Unfortunately, our society has had some kind of a strange twist where they say, well, you know, the classic thing is, well, why didn't you shoot him in the knee? You know, the guy coming at you with a knife or an axe and he's going to kill you. And why didn't you shoot him in the knee? Why don't you shoot the axe out of his hand? Because people really don't understand the reality of what goes on out there. So therefore, we are all in the law enforcement community, all of us are affected by this to greater degrees. Now, that when I'm listening to what everybody's saying, and when that comes up, okay, so we have that liability protection in law enforcement. If you're acting under the color of law and you're doing what you were trained to do and it turns out bad, that's horrific. But you weren't purposely doing something to hurt someone, but sometimes people get hurt in the business that we're in. The problem is when you extend that too far, like, and I don't want to talk about the Texas incident, but whoever it was, the leader commander that made the decision, don't go in, he was acting on what he thought was maybe his best interest or what he thought was right. But we all say, no, that was wrong. So how far does that liability protection go to him? So there's a fine line. But the reality is, for all of us, and you're taking care of a kid that has to be restrained because he's dangerous to himself or others. We have to, as a society, pick some winners and losers here. The person who's causing the problem is the loser. Everyone else is the winner. So we had to restrain that child, and we pulled him off the balcony and he broke his arm on the railing. Well, that's a shame, but we kept him from falling down and dying. And that's not something they should then sue you about. Same in law enforcement. When we see these kind of incidents, and we're saying, I made so many notes here as we're going through this. When there is a shooter in that building and we are all trained to go in right away, you know, the guy might have been a slow speaker there, but the reality is, going in with a 40 caliber handgun, running into AR-15 fire, you're going to die. That's a reality. You're not going to overcome that. So they do need to have equipment. But are there other things they could have done? They had 15 cops there. They could have done some other things, maybe, to get those kids out. We know that a mother was unhandcuffed. She jumped the fence and went in and got her own kids. Why weren't there just trails and trails of officers that were standing around getting all the rest of them kids out of there? I mean, I don't want to go into that detail. I wasn't there. I wasn't the commander. But when we see these incidents, we say we have to take some action. We can't just stand by. Having the right equipment certainly helps. Police leadership, law enforcement leadership. If you don't feel that your leadership is behind you, that they will do something, a political thing, and go, hey, wait a minute, I never told them to do that. I didn't authorize that, but that was the right thing to do. Then people back off. They back off and they protect themselves. Who wants to go to prison for doing your job? And in our society today, we can see law enforcement go to prison for doing their job. And I'm not talking about the people who do the wrong thing. I'm talking about somebody who does the right thing and it goes sideways, because that's what happens. You arrest someone because they committed a sexual assault, and guess what? They don't want to be arrested. So they fight with you, and you fight with them and they get injured. Well, couldn't you have done something else? Couldn't you have tasered them? Couldn't you have sprayed them? Couldn't you have talked to them nice? We're in this position where we're putting our law enforcement community in danger, and their responses obviously will be reactive now. We'll only go answer the calls. People are looking at things. I don't know. That's not so bad. Prosecutors won't prosecute. It's turning into, we're seeing the mess that this creates. We're seeing the danger in all of our society. When you talked about, Gary, de-escalation, that's a real thing. Anna, you talked about it too. We have to be able to do de-escalation because there are many times that someone is building up to violence that we can pull them back off the edge, so to speak, with de-escalation. Other times, like with shooters, you're not really going to talk to a shooter. Shooters coming in, they're going to start firing. You better be ready to respond to that. But many, many other incidents, you can talk people down. How are we trained to that? Do we train our staffs on doing that? Whether it's police, citizens, everybody should understand how to do that. So when I look at this and I say, our society has to make some decisions here. If those cops went in, and one of the things that came to my mind, and I'm not taking the side of right or wrong, but you see a bad guy in a room with a bunch of kids and you throw a volley of rounds at him. What if there's 4 kids behind that door and now you hit them? Now you have friendly fire with those children. Sure, you got the shooter and you brought it to an end. Do we say, well, you saved 300 other children and those 4 were just collateral damage, as somebody asked about it? Is that acceptable? Well, if it's my kid, it's not, right? So it's a bigger societal picture we have to decide here. We have mental illness out of control. We don't talk about it. We don't deal with it. Nobody wants to get involved in it. And it is one of the most dangerous things that go on. We're afraid to be proactive because, well, it's going to hurt somebody's feelings or somebody's going to think you're doing something for the wrong reason. We have to define these things. And the problem, Anthony, you brought it up. We have so many different opinions here. We have the political class that come in and turns everything into a game and twists it around, that we can't have honest conversations about things anymore. And unfortunately, the next deadly attack on a school or a business or a church or somewhere else is only weeks, hours, or minutes away. So we better come up with some ideas of what we're going to do here as we move forward. Everyone has to do something.
I think also when we do the Monday night quarterback, and the reason why we didn't want to jump so much on what happened at Uvalde, first off, is imagine you taking a profession, wanting to save lives, and then making a mistake that you have to live with. And I get it. Yes, there are victims in this. I'm not minimizing that, but there are people that are also human in their reactions, and we haven't been in their shoes. We can't honestly tell you how we would react because we don't know how it feels to be in the pressure of that situation. And then that person right there, they may have, in our eyes, failed to do something, but having said that, they have to live with that. I think, to me, that's the greatest thing that they have to live with forever. So I don't think that's their punishment. I don't think for us to sit there and, try to see things differently because we're Monday and we're far away from the situation without having the pressure of the situation, affecting our ability to make the decision. I think that's what people forget too. When you see someone out there, we go quick to disposition, but we don't realize pressures of a situation can change people. And you're right. We could keep on training, which would be great, make things automatic. But when it's real, it's real. And it does test somebody's character. I'm not giving somebody an excuse. I'm not. But that person has to now live with what they feel they are responsible for, and it's not even the fact that the sad thing is, guys, is in the end, my biggest concern is that when we look to blame people that have reacted, we push away the blame from the person who did it. The active shooter who decided that day, I'm going to shoot my grandmother and then I'm going to go ahead and shoot 19 people at a school. I mean, we do have true heroes that wind up going through the judgment more than the person who actually did the active shooter, because that active shooter's dead, gone. Judgment's over for him. They're gone. But this person that may have made a mistake, may have slipped up, we don't really know. But at the end of the day, this person has to live with the consequences of someone else's choices. He didn't wake up saying that, hey, I'm going to go ahead and there's going to be this and I'm going to fuck things up. And no, I mean, he has to literally live as if he's the one or she's the one that killed those people in that school. And I just want to be very wary of passing that judgment.
Anthony, let me say, I think you're right about that to an extent, and that could have been on his mind. Is there a transition from an active shooter they keep talking about to a barricaded subject? The cops just can't go in and execute someone because they did something very, very bad 10 minutes earlier. If they're standing there giving up or they're in a room by themselves, there is all that pressure, and I'm glad you brought that point up. One of the things I found in law enforcement, especially, that I would ask you, you're a supervisor, you're in the ranks. No one ever trained you how to send someone to their death. And I started thinking about that when, as a supervisor, we had a group of people doing these very bad bank robberies, and they were letting rounds go in rifles in the banks. And we had a young female police officer. She was awesome. She comes behind this vehicle and tries to stop it. 4 guys with rifles, and now she's in a pursuit. And as she's chasing this vehicle, she's calling it out. And to make the decision to let her continue to do her job, there was very clear on my mind that if she stops that car, she could die. I could call it off in 2 seconds. It says terminate. But her job and my job was to stop those people who were throwing rounds in banks that could kill innocent people. And to let her keep going was, no one prepared me for that, because I'm envisioning, as I'm letting her go, handing the flag to her family and saying, I'm the one that told her to go. I could have stopped it. So the human side of this has to be addressed. We have to, when you asked earlier, how do we help these cops to know they have to go faster? That's dealing with that, understanding what they have to do, why they have to do it, and then prepare them to go do it with the right equipment and the right backup so they're comfortable doing what they do. That's one thing that I see here that's probably missing, other than just regular training.
No, Joe, I agree. And even what Eric said, I like what he says. I understand your point, but people in leadership positions require 100%, because that is their position. Don't get me wrong. I get it. Their position to save lives. I just get very concerned where our thoughts really are our own when we're watching the news. I mean, you get all these different agendas going on, and we tend to side with whatever thought that we think we already want in our head to begin with. It's like that confirmation bias. And at the end, you got someone there that, we don't know. We could be that person. We don't know. I mean, we don't know. And at the end of the day, my biggest thing is, you have an active shooter who did what they did, and now we're looking for so many ways to justify what they've done, so many ways to get closure. I don't think closure is automatically connected to someone's failure or mistake, whatever it is. I mean, maybe we'll find that out later on. I think, to be honest with you, if we sit there and try to justify closure by looking at the failures of a response without really understanding the situations, the pressures, and how that can affect someone, again, not minimizing accountability, responsibility, just trying to stay focused where the main thing is. The main thing is the active shooter. The active shooter decided to take lives that day. And now what's going to happen is, not only do we have so many lives that are affected by the deaths of the people that they took out, we also have the lives of the people that, were supposed to respond that, at that moment, I don't know what happened. But again, all the choices that the active shooter made, other people are going to suffer the consequences of that. And I think it's just fair to just, maybe, because again, we don't know. I just don't want to pass unfair judgment, because at the end of the day, you don't know, even if this person is at fault.
And Anthony, that's what we're going to learn. We learn lessons from every one of these events. This is going to be a whole component we're going to learn from. What was the leadership decisions? What was the mentality? Why did they do it? What choices were made? So that the next leader can make a different decision. That's what we learn from each. We build on each one of these incidents, and we close gaps that we find in the response.
That's the key, guys. And I agree with Anthony, the armchair. Like, listen, here's the funny thing. When you teach leadership, one of the things that they teach you is that failure is feedback. And that's great in every profession but ours. Every profession but ours, because, man, the slightest failure can lead to this, so we cannot fail. We don't really have that opportunity to grow from failure because of the consequences of that and how that weighs on our soul. So I think in the end, I don't think it's going to help us much where we now get this person. Maybe there's, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not really, at the end of the day, he could wind up feeling so guilty that he takes his own life or she takes his own life, whatever. And I think what have we really solved here? That, to me, that's another casualty that's now affected by the active shooter. We give him another win. We give him another win. So at the end, I mean, let the chips fall there what they may. But having said that, my biggest thing is don't be biased by what the media has, because at the end of the day, you can clearly see CNN already started painting this bias about failure to respond. But I'll guarantee you something right now. If the officers went in too quick and took out a student by mistake, they would have said he went in too quick. They went in without thinking, and at the end of the day, what they're doing is they're taking one thing out that's the most important thing out of it all, the human element. The human element of the active shooter, the human element of the students, the human element of the teachers, the human element of the people that are responding. We're all human. We're all human. And the media doesn't help. I think that's well said by Anthony. The media doesn't help. It makes us think that those are our thoughts. And it just, again, it sucks. You don't want to be put in that situation, but I think it would be hypocritical of me to say that, well, if I was there, I would have done this, this, and this. I really don't know. I would like to think I would do these things. But pressures of the situation are truly what defines people, guys. It's not so much the disposition of a person. It's the pressures of the situation. And if you ignore the pressures and you totally focus on just the person, well, then you're also a bit of the problem. We have to really just kind of be open-minded. I don't want anybody taking their life because they feel. Let's just see what happens and see how it plays out. So let's have a closing thought. But this is a great dialogue, guys. I thought it was amazing, and I enjoyed it. But I thought we can first start with Anna. Anna, do you have any closing thoughts for this audience?
Yeah, thank you. So thanks for letting me join. And it was great hearing from everyone. I'm taking some of this back to my school, and hopefully we can improve things. As people have said, it's very easy to Monday morning quarterback. Hindsight is 20/20. However, as Joe said, we can just build on what we did before, look at patterns, and try to predict from there. Even when I'm working on creating IEPs, behavior plans, safety plans for students who are acting out in ways that are not safe for them or others, build on that student's past behaviors, but also similar behaviors from the past and build on that. But one thing that I work with teachers, administrators, and a lot of people as I'm coming across them, as well as parents, and I say this so often, I swear it's going to tattoo itself across my forehead. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Mentally stable people don't get up and decide, I'm going to go shoot people today. Mentally stable people don't say, I'm going to go hurt someone or myself. These people frequently have mental illnesses that need to be addressed and can often be seen, and when you really start digging into it, way back, not just into early adulthood, but into adolescence and even into early childhood. My mom, she is retiring from almost 30 years of teaching this year, retiring a little bit early. But she actually intervened with a student at her school who had hidden guns and had plans to follow through with those weapons. And that early intervention is key. And so that's the biggest thing, is working on supporting people who are showing these signs of mental illness, mental distress, emotional distress, and trying to intervene. We've gotten really good at saying, oh, take care of your best self, live your best life. But we haven't gotten really good at what do we do to help them?
Mm-hmm.
What's a really good actionable step to help these people? So just, I guess, just take care of each other. As we said, we're all human, give each other that grace, but also hold each other accountable. You never know what someone's going through. Just like I said, just be there for each other.
You know what you said? That's so perfect, Ann, because you said the key word actionable. And I think that's where people get most afraid. They're willing to talk and talk and talk, but the action that still has to be carried out on the front line. So to not involve them in the decisions and the steps moving forward, because in the end, I think the concern is how these, whatever it is, this plans that they want to develop later on, how does that get translated to something actionable? And that's sometimes where it gets lost, because people tend to like, I want to act, but this policy, this procedure here just seems to make me more hesitant, because there's just it becomes so complex. Because again, I like when we said failure is feedback, and it's supposed to be constructive, but in the process, it's supposed to build more confidence in our job. That's the key about failure. Failure is supposed to be a great learning tool to build confidence. I think now the problem is when people fail, things become more complex. They blame people, and now people get more concerned about making a mistake than they are about moving forward and doing the right thing. So I think that's a failure on the highest level. If you can't, through failure, reinforce some level of strength, you're wind up going to have a hesitant force that's more concerned about failing than doing the right thing. And that's where we start to breed that. And that's a fault of leadership. But thank you, Anna, for coming on. I know you have to go, so thank you very much. And I'm sure we'll have you on again one day. I'd be honored.
Yeah, Ann.
All right. Bye.
Bye,
Good
Ann.
night. Thank you, everyone.
Take care. So, Gary, any thoughts in closing?
Well, I just want to say that us as parents and grandparents, we need to do our part as well. Let's don't leave everything to the schools and the law enforcement folks. Let's have some preventative maintenance at home. Talk to your children. Try to lead them in the right direction and get them to talk to you when they come home. If they talk to you and they're not afraid to talk to you and tell you what's happening at school, they may tell you about little Johnny over here that's at school talking about guns, talking about things that he or she wants to do that are bad. And then if your children are open to speak with you with an open line of communication, then you as a parent have the duty to call someone, law enforcement, the school, and say, my son or daughter just told me little Johnny has been talking about bringing a gun to school or so forth. We can't leave everything for the law enforcement and the school teachers. And then all of us as parents, grandparents, school teachers, and law enforcement need to do what we just did tonight. Work together. Get everybody together, work together, and make plans out, and then get people like Joe, who is running around the country training people on what to do to protect their loved ones that are in the school. And communication is the big key, and we have to link together, to stop. Well, you're not going to stop the problem.
I think we're losing them. Gary, we're losing you, Gary.
Power of the internet.
Right on his closing thoughts. Gary, we lost your last 30 seconds.
Pardon me? You did?
You lost.
I was just going to say we have to link together and work together to solve some of the problems. We're not going to stop all the problems. We can head off some of them if we work as a team. Parents, grandparents, school, law enforcement.
Yeah, I think that's true. And even Natalie says the big thing is getting the people involved that are most affected, have them at the table, really get an honest discussion going on, and let the experts make the decisions. The experts aren't the ones that create the laws. The experts are the ones that have to do the actionable stuff, to be honest with you. The key to innovation really is the people closest to it, closest to the concern. People from a distance, they don't know innovation because they're from a distance, managing things from afar. The people that are on the ground, that are on the front, they're the best for innovation to occur. So to not have them at the table is where the failure begins. No, I didn't mute Gary. They thought I muted you, Gary. That's Julia. Julia's got jokes because she's constantly correcting me. But here's the funny thing. I muted myself a few times, Julia, but you weren't at the beginning of the show. So therefore you didn't have a chance to correct me. Joe, what's your thoughts, Joe?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Gary for coming on here with me and Anthony for having me here. And Anna was great. This was a good discussion, and I hope we brought some ideas to people's minds. Let me say, the most dangerous thing that I ever hear people say when they're at schools or businesses or any place I try and go to and try and beg them to please do the right thing, they say, you know what, that's all serious, and but you know what, it'll never happen here, or We don't have money for that. And that's a shame. The idea that it'll never happen here. Well, you know, I don't think they thought in Uvalde that it would happen there. I don't think Sandy Hook ever thought it would happen there. I don't think Columbine thought it would happen there, or in Buffalo in a food store. They didn't think it would happen there. The reality is we all have to be prepared. We have to take this seriously. This has to become, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, it is part of our modern existence. And we have got to try and do the right thing. There's lots of things we can do. Parents, you have got to go to the schools and say, what are you doing? What have you done? You know, schools they're not going to tell you their plans. They're not going to say what equipment they have in place and what training. They can't give away that information. You want to know, did you do something? Do you have an assessment? Not from 1987. Have you got a modern assessment? Do you have upgraded equipment? Are you training your staff? Are you preparing my children to survive? Because if we put pressure on them, they will do the right things. And all of us have got to take this serious, because who knows where it's going to happen next. One thing I ask Anthony every time I go out to speak, I say, listen, could somebody please do me a favor? Take 1 second, raise your hand and tell me when and where the next active shooter incident is going to take place. And in 12 years of doing this, I've never had anybody raise their hand, because the reality is your probability is very low you'll ever be involved in this in any school, any place. It's very small. But the reality is it happens 20 or 30 times a year. So really your chances are 50-50. It either happens to you or it doesn't. You had better be prepared. Everyone better be ready. And there's lots of things we can do.
Yeah, guys, as we wrap this dialogue, I just want you to know, guys, I mean, this was just an episode to kind of get people more informed, maybe build an understanding of the mindset of what's happening during an active shooter. I mean, to have Anna step in, give us the mindset of a teacher, Gary from the bailiff perspective, obviously that's great to know. And also to get Joe, who's an expert in active shooters, you know, just to kind of share and give you guys a perspective. And then it's up to you guys to take the perspective. And if it helped you grow, I hope so. I mean, that's the key of the show. Because then again, I think the key here, guys, is that the more informed we are, the better questions we learn to ask. You know, and sometimes if we don't have those questions in our head, then we're liable to drink from any water that's, you know, any lake that's giving us water. It doesn't mean it's good water. It just means that it's water that's available. You know, I thought this was a good idea to have a topic on, because yes, it was relevant. We did have a recent shooting, but we had a discussion to make sure that people knew that we weren't Monday night quarterbacking what happened. The reason why, guys, is because again, if there are mistakes made, trust and believe the punishment is already there. They don't need us to to come back in and try to look at what they did under a microscope. And, you know, I don't think there's a reason for that. I think that's more of let the investigators do what they got to do. Let's avoid our 2 cents when it comes to that. Let me just have some experts on that can give you guys an understanding of what it's like to kind of deal with active shooters, what's expected. And thank you, Kim. I love your compassion. That Commander Right Wrong will have to live with the outcome for the rest of his life. I worry for his mental health, major reason. For suicide. You know, I agree. That's why, like, as I said, I'm very careful with judgment now, because, you know, eventually you'll get to a point where if you are wrong, because you never know, it could be too late to apologize. And, you know, as I said, I'd rather not judge. I think the more information, I think that what's good about it is the reason why we were able to give the information we did today is because we didn't stay within the parameters of what happened in Texas. As you could see, we talked about all these other incidents and made it relevant. And then we brought a very good generalized discussion. And then however you could see it being applied, that's the key. That's where the magic is. Now, don't forget, guys, Friday at 4:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I have Ann Salter on. She's the author of a book called Predators. She worked with sex offenders. What we're going to be talking about is not for the lighthearted, if you will. If you read her book, you know this lady tells you how it is. We're going to be talking about some serious crimes, what goes through the people's minds when they do it. Everything from child molesters to pedophiles to rapists to sadists. So it's not a simple dialogue, but it's a very informative dialogue, because believe it or not, the more you know, the more you can protect yourself. And I think that's the key here too. The more you know, the more you can protect yourself. Now, maybe if the right people watch this, they can go back to their schools and ask the right questions. And I think that's what Joe, Gary, Anna was able to do today. So as always, guys, love you guys. I will see you Friday at 4. Just make sure you're subscribed, interact, engage, comment, Hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post up a video. And my final shout outs, Serrera, thank you. Alicia B, always a pleasure. She's always helping me behind the scenes create the show. Natalie out of Oklahoma, Eric Bernard, me, myself, and I. We had a good room today. Hope. The list goes on. Julie, of course, from Canada, who's always making fun of me for muting the mic. Jolene. So again, guys, thank you so much. Eric S., thank you guys. And I'll see you guys Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.